Hi everyone, it's great to be here today to recognise Refugee Week. A huge thank you for joining us, and also thanks to Gina and David for all of their support in making this webinar possible. My name is Robin. I'm a researcher at Loughborough University in the UK, and I've spent the past 9 years working as a practitioner and researcher with young refugees in sport, both within the UK and also within Canada. So today we're going to explore a bit more around what trauma is and how it may impact young refugees, how young refugees and practitioners understand trauma-informed approaches in sport, and then what matters most to young people in co-designing and delivering sport programmes to support their well-being. So we have colleagues from across the world who have joined us today, which is incredible. I just wanted to note that many of the examples that I give today will be based on work in Western resettlement contexts. And I recognise the unequal burden for supporting refugees lies unequivocally within neighbouring countries, often within the global south, and also that what works in one context may not work in another. So please feel free to use the chat to ask questions as we go. And I would also love to hear your insights and reflections from your own work as well. Sorry, folks. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So today I'm going to be drawing from 2 projects in London with young refugees in sport. So recognising that I do not hold lived experience of displacement, these projects are participatory, involving young refugees, community groups and practitioners in all aspects of the research in order to understand young people's experiences and also bring about change in areas that matter to them. So the first project was at a refugee resettlement country, and we've just been awarded a large grant to co-create a new youth wellbeing programme that centred sport and leisure activities alongside ESOL, therapy, casework and advocacy as well. So the focus of the project was on co-creating, delivering and evaluating the sport and wellbeing programme with the young people and the staff. And initially, when we first started working there, it was a really small programme. So it was just a youth group and a football project with 1 part-time member of staff. So the focus of the project was very much on building organisational capacity, co-creating a methodology, monitoring evaluation and learning processes, as well as co-creating and evaluating the programme. And I'm also going to be drawing from a current project with a research partner, I Speak Football, who are an amazing refugee-led social enterprise in London that integrate language learning alongside football to support the wellbeing, inclusion and education of young refugees in London. So we're currently working with their wonderful youth advisory boards to explore understandings of trauma-informed approaches in sport, to co-create a trauma-informed methodology for the I Speak programme, as well as to pilot and evaluate a trauma-informed programme. So I'm going to be drawing off some of this work today. Before we get started, I just wanted to run over some definitions early on here, so we're all on the same page. Because whether someone is a migrant, whether they're a refugee or an asylum seeker, has a huge impact on their experiences. The term migrant, we often see in the media, is used incorrectly as an all-encompassing term, which captures both forced migrants who have been forced to flee their homes and voluntary migrants who often make the decision to migrate for better lives for their families or for economic opportunities. So under the banner of forced migrants, we have refugees. So this is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their home country due to a fear of persecution. And this could be on the basis of characteristics such as race, religion, nationality, and membership to a particular group. It could also be as a result of climate change as well. And then asylum seekers flee for the same reasons as somebody who is a refugee, yet they do not have refugee status yet. So when they arrive at the border, this is when they will undergo the refugee determination process. And as we know, this process is incredibly slow, dehumanizing, and can often take years. And then we have unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So these young people are aged under 18 years old, and they typically arrive at the border alone, and then that is where they will claim for asylum. They're typically looked at by social services. So today, I'm going to be using the term refugee youth, as this is the term that many of the young people that I have worked with kind of seem to identify best with. So there is the potential for young refugees across their lives and across different spaces to have experienced multiple traumas. And this can be across the displacement context, the transit context during their journeys. And these harms can also be ongoing in the resettlement country as well. So young people may flee their homes due to diverse reasons, as we noted earlier. And this can result in the death or separation from loved ones. It can result in, loss of home, exploitation, violence, alongside a lack of control and safety as well. And during transits on young people's journeys, they often flee to neighbouring countries. They may be living in urban centres or refugee camps. And during these spaces, they often have limited rights and mobilities. There may be gaps in young people's education. They may experience discrimination, poverty. And it's important to note that these journeys are often really dangerous as well. There can be a risk of trafficking, abuse and violence. And we often see, instances, for example, when folks are crossing, when making the boat crossings over. And these challenges can also be exemplified for unaccompanied minors who make these journeys alone. And for those who do make it to Western resettlement countries, for example, the UK, the EU, Australia, Canada, many of these countries have very hostile immigration policies. There are typically very few safe routes now for folks to get to that country. There may be no right to work, living in destitution, of minimal welfare support, unsafe accommodation. And on top of this, you have the challenges of adopting to a new culture and learning a new language. But within this, we also have to recognise that young refugees are not passive victims, and that they make decisions in their best interest to support what matters in their lives and their futures, and that they have a wealth of strengths and capabilities and big dreams for the future. So what is trauma? Trauma is a common consequence of witnessing something shocking, dangerous, or life-threatening. So this definition is from the International Rescue Committee. We've worked quite closely alongside this organisation, and cannot recommend them enough. They have been fantastic in working with our young people and delivering trauma-informed training for our staff as well. And with trauma, it's often less about the event itself, so less about something that happened in the past, but rather it's about how that pain and that fear lives inside of us, how it lives in our memories, our emotions, and our bodies. So here we're often talking about, the legacy of trauma. So we asked the Youth Advisory Board in one of our share and learn workshops at, I Speak Football, about how they understand trauma. And you can see the responses here on the right. So one of the young people used the term memory of harm, which I thought was really fitting. Other young people talked about how trauma can be caused by big stressors or big T's, such as war, abuse, and violence. But they also noted how it can also be caused by seemingly smaller stressors, such as bullying that occurs over time. They also noted how it's an involuntary reaction. You can't choose it. And they also highlighted the subjective nature of trauma, how two young people may experience the exact same event, but only one may become traumatized afterwards, as well as how it looks different in everyone. And across many of the young people's responses, we saw an emphasis on the diverse impacts of trauma on the body, brain, as well as on emotions as well. So alongside asking the young people more around kind of how they understand trauma, we also wanted to understand more around the perceived impacts of trauma on young people from refugee backgrounds. Because as we know, trauma can have a huge impact on young people, impacting their ability to, regulate their emotions, to learn new content, remember information, control behavior. I think this is especially prominent for children and young people whose brains are still developing. So we can see here some of the young people's insights from where they mapped out the impacts of trauma across behavior, across their bodies, cognitive development and emotions. So in behavioral impacts, we can see things here such as frustration, shouting and screaming, anger, violence, laziness, and then how that can then impact school and work, how it can lead to unhealthy coping mechanisms. With regards to impact on their bodies, young people talked about how it can impact their breath. So difficulty breathing, having a pounding chest, having issues falling asleep or staying asleep at night, low energy, body aches, migraines. With regards to cognitive function, young people talked about how it impacts memory loss, the ability to focus, which can be a real challenge, within school and work, how it can lead to negativity, as well as finding it hard to process information. And with regards to emotions, young people talked about how it can cause anxiety and stress and sadness, as well as anger and overthinking. And it's important to recognize here that trauma can also impact a young person's sense of community and belonging, as well as their ability to build trust and healthy relationships with others, both young people and adults. So our understandings of trauma, especially here in the West, tend to be derived from Western notions of well-being and trauma. And here we tend to see a heavy emphasis on the medical model. Trauma is often conceptualized as something that is individualized. We see a focus on what is happening inside of the person's brain and their body, rather than actually what is happening around them. And the fact that much of the trauma has been caused by oppressive systems, policies, and structures. Healing is often perceived as a private act, something that is achieved through therapeutic support and, through being so resilient, rather than actually recognizing that in many cultures, in many communities, healing is seen as something that is collective, something that very much centers community and solidarity. We can also see an emphasis on the medicalization of trauma, where trauma is treated as a pathology, a set of symptoms to be diagnosed and treated through psychology and therapeutic services. We often see an emphasis on Western conceptualizations of health, rather than more holistic understandings of health. As such, we may see limited attention to embodied, emotional, spiritual, cultural, and religious perspectives. And it's important to note that in many cultures, that there is no word for trauma, there is no word for mental health, and it is, incredibly stigmatized. And these Western, models of trauma can be really helpful in terms of, for some refugees who have experienced trauma. But I think it's also important to recognize that they don't fit all experiences, and they sometimes don't quite capture the realities that many young refugees face. So I would like you to take a moment, and I would like you to have a think about some of the young people that you work with day to day, and to have a think about, how do different cultures and communities that you work with understand healing and trauma. And I'd just like you to, have a think, and to, kind of keep this in the back of your mind as we go through, because I think that's going to be really important. And if you would like to share your reflections in the chat, please do so. And Mark will bring us back to those as we go. So in thinking more holistically around the kind of value of sports in the lives of young refugees, it's important to recognise that there's a large body of research which has examined the value and the meaning of sport in the lives of these young people. Sport can be a really important site for rebuilding fragmented social networks, which is especially important, if young people don't yet have that support network within the resettlement country. It can be an important site for making friends, for building trusted relationships with adults, for reducing isolation and loneliness, and also really important in fostering a sense of belonging and solidarity and cultivating collective spaces of healing. Sport can also be a site where young people can be young people, where they can feel joy, where they can have fun, they can feel that sense of pleasure. And that's especially important amid the ongoing stress of hostile asylum policies. Sport can also provide a sense of agency over your body. Let's say you are playing football and, you are scoring a goal. You're very much using your body in order to be able to achieve that end result. And sport can also be a really important space for feeling a sense of routine and structure within young people's day-to-day lives. It can be an also important space for negotiating identity. Many young people grow up playing some kind of sport or physical culture or games at home. So it can be an important space for maintaining cultural and religious traditions and practices and languages in a new country, as well as a space for sharing, part of who we are and our identity with others. It can also be a space for developing knowledge and understanding of cultural norms and languages and practices in the new resettlement country, which can then support integration. And lastly, there are well-known psychological benefits for young refugees participating in sport. It can offer a short-term escape from stress, support emotional regulation, as well as help to reduce symptoms of PTSD and depression. But within this, it's also important to recognise that sport can be a site of harm for young people from refugee backgrounds. So it's important for coaches and practitioners to have an understanding of trauma when we're working in this space. And to be honest, when I first started working in this space 8 years ago, I didn't yet have that knowledge. As a practitioner, I witnessed, large fights escalating really quickly over a bad tackle. I noticed young people becoming triggered when they were taking part in physical activity, feeling uncomfortable with feeling their heart rate increasing and their body becoming sweaty. I witnessed young people becoming triggered in a dancing session because of the music that was being played. And at the time, I misinterpreted these young people's responses. So I think it's really important to think about trauma in the context of sport due to several reasons. I think the first is that taking part in sport often happens in very public spaces, whether it be a leisure centre, whether it be, an outdoor pitch. And this means that our bodies are on display. Within sport, working with others is often required, and this can lead to stress and conflict and competition. And it doesn't matter if that's at a social level or whether it's at a more competitive elite level. Physical contact is often a part of sport, whether it be through contact sports more explicitly, such as rugby, or even through yoga, gymnastics. Within sport, we often see that there's a lot of instructions and a lot of information to process. And not only do we have to think about, the possible frustration from the language barrier this can cause, but also thinking about how young people's cognitive development has been impacted by trauma. So I think the key thing here is that, it's important to consider how the spaces, how feelings, interactions, and how physical sensations have the potential to be triggering for young people who have experienced trauma. And for coaches, there is a possibility of misinterpreting young people's responses, of assuming young people are being rude or they're being naughty, or even assuming that, they're being lazy when they're disengaged. And also that can cause issues for us in terms of being able to self-regulate and to stay calm within that moment. If we are met with anger and frustration, it's sometimes we get caught up in the moment, and we kind of reflect that back. So it's really important for us, within sessions, both before sessions in the planning and design phase, to think more around potential triggers, but also to be able to be responsive during delivery as well. So during a traumatic event, our brain goes into survival mode, and many people struggle to leave this, beyond the event itself, and especially if they've experienced multiple traumas. So this is a really nice graphic here. I definitely did not create this. I do not have these skills. It was created through blessing, manifesting, and it's exploring the window of tolerance, which is a really helpful model for understanding how trauma can impact young people's brains. And it's really important for us to consider within the context of sport. Being able to learn to connect with others and process trauma takes place, when we are within our window of tolerance. So in this zone, we feel as though we can handle whatever is happening within our lives. So this here is the green zone right in the middle. And then we have freeze and fight flight, which are involuntary reactions to being triggered. We do not choose these. Often we have no control over these. So flight fight is often called hyperarousal, and this is the pink zone here. And this is where we may witness a young person becoming really overwhelmed with emotion, whether this be overwhelmed with anxiety, anger, or feeling out of control. And this can lead to the body wanting to run away or to fight. And often, this is where we will see aggression and anger, as well as young people who are, very stressed and unable to regulate. And then in the blue zone here, we have freeze or hypoarousal. And this is where we may witness young people who are looking spacey. They may be looking zoned out, they may be looking frozen. So in the context of sports sessions, they may be really struggling to take in, instructions that you're giving, or it may be challenging for them to connect with you or to connect with other young people in the session. And young people could arrive at your session outside of their window of tolerance, or they may go into hyper or hypoarousal during the session as a result of, an interaction, a situation on the pitch, or a feeling, a sensation that brings back painful memories. So it's important to think about how we can foster safety, control, as well as predictability in sessions over time to support young people to stay within their window of tolerance. So trauma-informed practice. Sorry, you got a question, Mark?
We've got a question. How can coaches proactively trauma-informed approaches when working with refugees who have recently experienced the effects of war?
Sorry, Mark, can you repeat
from John
that?
Cato. Yeah, from John in the community group. How can coaches proactively implement trauma-informed approaches when working with refugees who have recently experienced the effects of war? That might be coming up in your presentation soon, but I wanted to ask as it came up.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That is an absolutely fantastic question. And yeah, we're going to talk all about that. One of the key things is very much around creating a safe place to land initially, and then going from there. So yeah, in a minute, we will share through some really kind of practical things that you can do in order to support feelings of, safety, both within the kind of group setting, but also, directly for this young person as well. So yeah, great question. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, if you have any other questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and Mark's going to read them out as we go along.
Well, there you go. Oh, yeah, straight away, another one. Sorry. From Raisa Ramandavan. I have a question with regards to the discussion about coaches perception of rudeness or disrespect, and the perspective of young people. Working with neurodivergents, we have very similar perceptions. Can we hear more about the experience of neurodivergent displaced people? Do you have any tools for trauma and neurodivergent displaced people?
That's a fantastic question. It really is. And I think often we do see that overlap with regards to neurodivergence and trauma. So I'm going to be honest, this isn't my area of expertise. However, one of my colleagues, Ollie, he has done some work within this area. So I can definitely get you in contact with him to kind of talk through this a little bit more. But yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think some of the kind of key principles that we go over later, I think some of them do have relevance across the board. I think when it comes to implementing trauma-informed approaches, the whole idea is that it's around best practice in coaching. It doesn't matter, whether young people have experienced trauma or not. I think these are kind of really key aspects that are important to think about when we are designing and delivering our sessions. So yeah, hopefully some of it is helpful as we go, but I can definitely get you in contact with my colleague, and I'm sure he would love to talk about this further and draw on some specific examples as well. Awesome. Mark, any other questions?
Not for now.
Cool. Sounds great. So trauma-informed practice is very much a strength-based framework, and it's grounded in both our understanding of as well as our responsiveness to trauma. And there are kind of 4 key principles which have been proposed when it comes to trauma-informed practice. And as I mentioned, this is about thinking, how can we create a safe space, whether or not young people may have experienced trauma. So the first is thinking more around the realization of trauma. So having an understanding around the impact of trauma and how it can impact young people in all different aspects of their lives. And the second is being able to recognize the signs of trauma. So being able to actually recognize within your session if a young person is going into hypo or hyper arousal. And next is being able to respond. And this is one of the hardest things, because it's often actually being able to respond in the moment in a way that embraces our understanding of trauma. And I think a key part of this is around staff training. And a lot of it also comes into how we design and deliver sessions in a way that emphasizes safety. And lastly, resisting re-traumatisation. So thinking more again around our methodology, our program design, how we're evaluating our programs, and ensuring that we are not doing further harm to young people through the sessions that we are running. So I think these principles can be really useful when thinking more broadly, for coaches around session design and delivery. But I think it's also important to recognise that, the focus of these does seem to be some degrees around not doing further harm. But one of the great things with sport and physical activity, as we've seen, is that it can have, really diverse value and meaning within young people's lives. So I think it's also important to think more holistically around how we can develop collective spaces of healing and community within our programs as well. So, trauma-informed principles. So we have here 5 key principles or big ideas. So one of my colleagues, Oliver Hooper, who is a collaborator on this project, he developed these based off his work within physical education and youth sports. And the principles were developed as a way of thinking about how teachers, especially PE teachers, may be able to support young people who have experienced trauma. So all 5 of these principles are interconnected and equally important. So in one of our share and learn workshops with the I Speak Youth Advisory Board, we shared these principles with the young people, and we asked them to really kind of reflect on these and to think about how we could tailor these when we're thinking around designing and delivering community sport programs for young people from refugee backgrounds. So we're going to share with you some of our insights, and I've also added in some examples here from other projects that I've been involved in with young people from refugee backgrounds, as well as drawing on some of the experiences of coaches and practitioners as well. So it is important to note that these are preliminary, but they're quite neat in terms of thinking more around different ideas and suggestions that could potentially be implemented into session. So the first is around safety and well-being. So this kind of goes beyond making sure that someone doesn't just trip over and hurt themselves, i.e. physical safety, but it's about being able to create a space where young people are able to share their feelings, where they feel accepted for who they are, as well as to have a sense of control over the environment. So we need to think about different spaces. So not only where the session happens, whether it be a leisure centre, whether it be a pitch, but also thinking about changing rooms, for example, and maybe even young people's journey to and from the session. Thinking even around when they arrive at the session, how are they feeling at that moment. And specifically for working with young refugees, I think one of the biggest things that has come up a lot in this work is that for many young people, and I think this relates back to the question here, is that for many young people who are still experiencing ongoing trauma and lack of safety, so maybe they're newly arrived, they don't yet have refugee status, they're not in appropriate housing, there are issues with enrolment in education. Often sport is not the priority, and you can see the quote here from Jared. So initially he came along to the sessions to get help with his asylum casework, because for him that was the most important thing, that was the priority, because there was such a lack of safety in all other areas of his life. And then once he had been able to access his basic support and needs, that's when he was able to engage more meaningfully within the sport and leisure programs. And I think this really speaks to the importance. Well, I think it really speaks to the fact that sport alone is not always enough, and the importance of actually embedding sport within wider holistic support, or even having strong referral pathways. And I think having strong partnership networks with local resettlement teams, with social workers, with education providers, healthcare providers, with therapeutic support is really important here. And then you can see here on this list, these are some of the other things that came up for the young people. So the idea of having a separate chill out space, which is different from the kind of main area where the sport session is taking place, where young people can go if they're feeling overwhelmed, enabling young people to share their story on their own terms. I think this is really important, and actually not sharing one story is an act of agency in itself. And to take this away, it can be, really re-traumatizing, and it can further take away, that sense of control. And on the topic of choice, I think this is where there is the possibility for young people to be able to, even make small decisions through sports activities, whether it be having a choice in the role they take on during the session. So if they don't enjoy the particular sport they're doing that day, or maybe they come to the session and they're just not feeling it, having different opportunities for roles, whether it be supporting coaching, refereeing, or even making arts banners which are related to the activity. Related to that, a choice of activity, so providing a range of activities that young people could take part in, providing religious accommodations. I think this is really important. Some of the young people have talked about how huge barriers involve being forced to wear uniforms that weren't modest, there not being a prayer room, there not being women's only spaces. And I think we can also go beyond that as well in terms of thinking about, not only accommodating, people's, religious needs, but also thinking about how can we celebrate, different religions within our sessions. So some really neat examples that I've seen on the ground is having communal iftar after the sport session. Everyone comes together, celebrating holidays together, whether it be Diwali, whether it be Eid, everyone, coming together to, really, celebrate each other's cultures and religions. And I think that's key in actually building that sense of community. Providing separate spaces potentially for women, LGBTQ plus groups. I've seen in my work, many instances of discrimination in mixed gender sessions, for example, or where we've had LGBTQ plus folk at the session, and there have been experiences of discrimination from other young people. So having the opportunity for those separate spaces is really important. Language. So translating key parts of information, having peer language buddies, maybe other young people who have been here slightly longer, decentering English in activities, not understanding what is happening in the session, is a huge barrier to feeling safe. And then lastly, thinking around, different kind of group calming or energizing activities. So it can be helpful to think about how we can embed these both as and when needed, or even during kind of transitions between activities. So if we see that some of the members of the group are going into hyper arousal, maybe we've seen that, it's got quite competitive, there are some bad tackles, maybe thinking about whether we want to do some kind of like a timeout, some group, breathing exercises. And if we see folks kind of starting to, disengage and going to hypo arousal, thinking about energy raising activities. And then establishing routines and structures. So for young refugees, that sense of routine and control and structure often gets taken away, especially for young people who haven't yet got refugee status. So it's important to ensure that young people know what to expect within this session, and that very much links to them feeling safe. So for example, this can involve holding sessions at the same time, the same place, so young people actually know what to expect. Having routines and structures to help young people so they don't feel as overwhelmed. So we've done it before the session, a few days before. We send out a flyer which has, photos of the activity we're going to be doing that week, the sport we're going to be doing that week. It has, a brief overview of kind of what we're going to be doing, and then, running through that, in the introduction to the session. Another idea is also to have a visual schedule. So this came for some of the young people in terms of either, kind of having pictures which show what you're going to be doing and when, or having something on the board behind you. And I think related to this as well, providing notice if things change. This is really important. And then lastly, thinking about opening and closing rituals. So having consistent things that you do at the start and the end of sessions, whether it be doing some sort of settling in, drama-based activity or story sharing circle, as well as something that you do at the end of the session as well. And then...
Robert. Thank you. A question from the group from Tom Marchesi. I wonder if there should also be more of a focus on the fun element versus making anything too competitive.
Yeah.
If a young person is suffering from trauma, they'll likely want a positive experience, i.e. not losing.
Yeah.
So potentially mixing abilities and ensuring that everyone can win or score. Yeah. How do you feel about that?
Definitely, Tom, you are absolutely spot on. And there has actually been research which has shown that at the competitive level, doing competitive sport can actually have very negative impacts on young people who have experienced trauma. So I think it does depend a lot on the context that you're working in, the environment, and also what the young people want to get out of that space as well. So often for newly arrived young people, starting with more social sessions, which are mixed ability, mixing the teams up, and just having that emphasis on being in that space together, connecting, having fun is so important. And then what we've seen often is kind of then having a pathway for young people who do then wish to get involved in more competitive sports. Because I think having those opportunities is also really important in terms of actually supporting young people in, working towards their strengths as well as their dreams as well. So yeah, fantastic question. And yeah, you're definitely spot on. You've got to be really careful when it comes to more competitive sport for sure. Awesome. So in terms of developing positive relationships, some of the key things here are around building trust gradually. So again, this links to feeling safe, and young people not feeling left out of the session. And the relationships with coaches are really important in young people feeling valued and modeling healthy relationships as well here. However, trust can be challenging to build. And as we know, it can be precarious as well. So even just kind of getting to know young people through asking about their hobbies, what they've been up to, and showing through your actions that you care is important, as well as checking in regularly as well, whether it be through text and phone call outside of sessions. And I think related to this, something that's come up a lot is around how we end relationships. As we know, there's often a large staff turnover in the third sector. So actually acknowledging the end of a relationship, whether it be through having, like we've done this before, we had like a big celebration party when a staff member left, we shared photos, we ate food together and shared happy memories together. Another key thing to think about here is what we do when things do go wrong, e.g. behavioural incidents. And ensuring that young people are grounded before we actually kind of start to kind of talk it through and have more of a conversation around what they've done and the impacts that this can have. But I think what's key here is also starting with a clean slate in the next session. Some other key things that came up here: a buddy system, so matching a new participant with a young person who's been in the program a while. Co-creating expectations for behaviours, rules, how we want to be in the space together, how we want to interact. Really focus on building community through having group projects and games, opportunities for cultural exchange and sharing. And then responding to youth voice. So recognizing that if we want to develop, trauma-informed spaces, that we not only need to respond to, but also centre young people's voices. Everyone has different wants and needs and lived experiences. So, this can range from, active listening, providing opportunity and spaces for young people to express themselves, share their thoughts in group, individual settings. This could be through having post-it notes at the beginning or end of sessions for people to share their feedback, all the way through to co-design, involving young people in decisions about what activities they would like to do, how, when, and where. Even going as far, thinking around involving young people in designing and decorating the space itself. Embedding youth participation mechanisms, whether it be establishing a youth advisory group, having young trustees, involving young people in recruitment, as well as providing opportunities for advocacy. For some of the young people I've worked with, this has been really central, having opportunities for, young people to get involved in social action and campaigning, and actually being able to use their knowledge and skills to bring about change and to support other young people. And then lastly, promoting strengths. So providing opportunities to promote young people's self-esteem and to help them see what they're capable of. So providing opportunities for young people to take active roles in sessions, whether it be running a game or an activity that aligns with their skills. I think a focus here on gradual challenges is really important in order for this to be an empowering experience where young people can, achieve success. So starting small, whether it be a young person supporting running an icebreaker, and then eventually going on to maybe running a drill and running a session. Having established leadership pathways in place. This is something that has been important to many of the young people that I've worked with, whether it be having opportunities for volunteering, having young leader schemes, peer mentoring, all the way through to having opportunities for part-time coaching, refereeing, youth work. And then connected to this, having skill development opportunities. So opportunities for young people to develop their knowledge and skills in areas that matter to them, whether it be through like mentoring with community partners, through gaining qualifications, through courses in coaching, refereeing, through workshops. And lastly, a focus on goal setting. So working with young people to set goals that are meaningful to them and supporting them in, achieving that, as well as to reflect on their progress throughout, alongside, celebrating and sharing individual achievements and successes. Whether it be, someone's football team did really well at the weekend, or someone's done well on a test, or they've gained refugee status, whatever it may be. But I think that's really key in terms of actually kind of fostering that sense of, community and belonging, as well as promoting strengths and capabilities. So I think some of the key takeaways here is that, with sport, it can be a really important site for fostering belonging, connection, joy. However, as we've seen, it can also be a site for social exclusion, re-traumatisation, and a lack of safety. And I think in developing programs for young refugees, one of the biggest things that has come up across the board is that it's moving beyond those individual understandings of trauma, but it's thinking about the possibilities of sport as a kind of collective space of healing where people can come together, they can share, they can connect. And a lot of this is around centering positive relationships, trust and choice, as well as really playing to young people's strengths and identities. And a key component of this is involving young people within this process of co-creating, trauma-informed methodologies and program design, as well as in delivery as well. Because ultimately, everyone has different needs and lived experiences, and it can be a really powerful tool in terms of, in promoting young people's, agency, as well as their ownership within the program as well. So I recognise we are running out of time here. Sorry, folks, I have gone over big time. So I would now like to open up the floor to any questions that you may have.
Okay, I'll warm things up. Robin, can you hear me?
Yeah, you are a little bit fuzzy, but yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry about that, Turkish connections. One of the questions I had is that, do you have any experience that some sports are more triggering than others, or is it just very different for each person and the context? Or are there some sports that you might start a series of workshops with and then move into competitive ones, or are others, are different types of sports more or less triggering, or is it really just context specific?
I think it is the sport, but I think it's also around how we're setting up this sport and the spaces that we're creating, and actually kind of what we're putting in place during the session as well. Even thinking so much around adaptions that we can bring into the game to reduce the level of competition or to increase the level of teamwork. For example, having more passes, thinking about who's on each team as well. I think that's important, mixing up abilities, thinking about the size of, the pitch that we're using. I think there are a lot of different factors. And I think, that a lot of it is around that kind of how we're designing these programs and how we're creating these spaces. I think that is really important. From what I've seen, I think football, as we know, it's so deeply embedded within so many people's life histories. There's a lot of passion there for sure, and often it's very deeply ingrained in their sense of identity and self. And as we know, you can get hard tackles. There's high emotions. So from what I've seen, I would say more competitive football sessions is where I have seen where I've seen quite a few different incidences occur and young people become triggered. But I think, again, it's a lot around the context itself. Water sports, that's another setting. I've seen examples within the context of, kayaking, other types of water sports. dancing, even thinking around music that's being played, thinking around instruments and how that can evoke, you know, painful memories within young people. So I think it is very diverse. I think a lot of it is around intentionality of how we are actually designing these programs. But I think a big part, especially at the kind of early stage, is around decentering competition, and trying to foster opportunities for teamwork and collaboration, as well as providing opportunities for choice. I think that's a big one, for choice and control. I think that's really key in, you know, fostering feelings of safety.
Thank you. There's some amazing people in the room, so I'll leave the floor open. Hopefully someone else has another question or comment. Okay. Fantastic. Okay. Great. Robin, anything more for your side?
No, I think one of the key takeaways is that I think what works in one context may not work in another. And I think actually involving the young people in, you know, in understanding what really matters most to them within these spaces, and what safety and connection and empowerment actually looks like in their lives, I think is really important here. So thinking around how can we actually embed opportunities for meaningful co-production and co-design, I think that's really important. And yeah, if anyone would like to chat further, my email is on the slides and I think it's circulated. So yeah, please feel free to, you know, drop me a message. Would love to chat more.
Thank you very much, Robin. And thank you very much for all the participants. Yeah, for me as well, I think the how is so much more important than the what, and it's that approach. You know, it's not trauma-informed practices. Trauma-informed approach is what we're trying to promote here, because that will help you. There's no one way of doing it. There's no one way of being trauma-informed. It's trying to be led by that. So thank you very much for that. A couple of people asked about the presentation. We're going to look at the recording, make sure that we can share it. If we can share all of it, we will. If we can't, we'll have some kind of summary that will go out on the Sports for Development page, and we'll make sure that. And then stay tuned to what we're doing with I Speak Football. Follow Robin on LinkedIn as well. Yeah, we hope to have more of this. And happy Refugee Week, and thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, practitioners are doing in this space. We really appreciate it. Yes, there you go. Before we sign off, Robin's email is just there. And I see Zina. Is there anything from the platform you'd like to say, Zina?
No, just thank you for the webinar. Well, I know it's a sensitive topic, so thank you for, as always, handling it so well, and thank you for coming up with the idea to share all of this on the platform. And that's it for me. And of course, stay tuned for any other upcoming events that we keep posting on the event page on the S4D, Sport for Development community platform.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
for having
guys.
us.
Bye.
Bye. Awesome. Right, Mark, sorry, I've got to head off. I've got the staff meeting.
Cool. I'll stop the recording.
Perfect.
And yeah,
See you
cheers
soon.
everyone.
Bye.
Great. That was really good. Bye.